So yeah, Siberian, there's not much to really say here. Of course, unsurprisingly, it is made to fit in with the harsh climate, and so features a lot of animal hides and fur. And these are often used to line the edges of clothes and hoods. And of course, generally big, thick coats are worn because if not, you'll freeze to death. Also, one interesting thing is that the women also did wear a veil a lot of the time around their hair, even if they were wearing a hoodie as well. All right, so let's look at some examples of Siberian clothing. First, we have the Selkup people. Keep in mind, these are all going to be right Siberia, so all in current day Russia. The Evenk, I think the Evenk have their own autonomous area within Russia. The Ulch, very cool fur hoodie she's wearing over here. The Dolgan, the Nivk people. I thought this was a very cool looking picture here. Very nice embroidered coat that she's wearing. Okay, and so that's sort of it. And now we'll go to Mongolians. So Mongolian clothing featured long robes for both genders, with men often wearing a tight square hat on top of their head, while women would wear unique and pointy hats that tended to be somewhat triangular, but could also have big ear flaps, many hanging beads, a protruding front, or a large and narrow rectangle pointing straight up. And so there's a lot of variety there. Men and women's robes were also long, but men's tended to be a little bit shorter, while women's tended to be a little more colorful and decorated. And underneath for footwear, they would wear boots, usually made out of leather. All right, so let's get started. Here we have the Tuvan people, and this is sort of the hat. I was having a really hard time describing what shape this hat is, but yeah, this kind of a hat's very common across Mongolian peoples here. And yeah, you can see this guy is doing that famous Mongolian throat singing, so we can kind of already imagine that playing in the background. Um, so that's pretty cool. All right, this is the Uyghur, not to be confused with the Uyghur people. And I think they live in Western Mongolia. And yeah, same thing, interesting kind of pointy hats for the women, and they're all wearing robes here. The Dar people, and these guys are probably at some fashion show based on how things are here, but we can see the black boots, black leather boots that both of them are wearing, as well as the interesting hat for the woman. Buryats. So the Buryats actually live in Russia, not in Mongolia, but they live right next to Mongolia and they have similar clothing, which is why I included it there. The Kalmyks. The Kalmyks are actually interesting. They live in Russia and not anywhere near Mongolia. The Kalmyks are descendants of Mongols who invaded Russia and then settled right near the Caucasus. So the Kalmyks are actually very close to the Caucasus and are the only Buddhists anywhere in that region. So Kalmyks are a very interesting group of people. We get to the actual Mongols themselves, right? And so here's sort of what I was talking about. You look at all these different hats worn by the women, and they're all very unique. We have the tall, hard ones here, the big flaps, lots of earrings and jewelry and all that. A whole wide variety, but they're all very colorful. Whereas the men, as we can see, much more simple, wearing once again those black leather boots. And yeah, generally more, I guess, typical hats, as we would call them here. Something that you wouldn't be surprised to see in a Western country. The Kachin Mongols, more in Eastern Mongolia, I believe. Let's get to Japanese here now. So, of course, Japanese traditional clothing is very famous worldwide, with the most famous example being the kimono, which is a wrapped front garment with square sleeves and a rectangular body. It was generally worn with an obi or a ribbon-like sash, and this was a practice that originated in the 17th century, and it also tended to be tied at the back. The kimono was also typically worn with a tabi or split-toed socks that were usually white, and they were worn with zori or Japanese sandals. They're usually decorated with dyed patterns that could feature gold and silver embroidery, and they usually had floral motifs, especially cherry blossoms. For men, their kimonos usually were black, blue, green, or brown. So, of course, here is an example, right? So the Japanese, they're both wearing a kimono, but his is much simpler, right? Just simple black and gray. They're both holding fans. The woman's is much more decorated, as we can see. So many floral motifs everywhere, lots of flowers. Looks like a whole art scene over here on her kimono. Again, both are wearing the white socks, both are wearing the zori or the sandals. Um, and so, yeah, these guys, I don't know, maybe they're getting married. I'm not 100% sure. And then over here on the right, this is probably more what would be worn by the emperors and the empresses, at least on a daily basis. They would have cooler clothes for ceremonies and all that. Um, but yeah, we can see, right, very long Chinese-inspired robes. And yes, all this area is influenced by Chinese clothing, to no one's surprise. And yeah, here's another example, Ryukyuan, which was spoken on the Ryukyu Islands, the most famous of which is Okinawa. Um, and so it's similar to Japanese, but we can see there is somewhat of a difference there. And then finally, the Ainu. The Ainu are the native people of Hokkaido, or the northern island of Japan. And again, there are similarities, but you can still see, right, they have a local variety of this style. All right, so next we'll get to Korean. So yeah, Korean traditional clothing was known as the hanbok and has been worn since at least the 6th century. The upper part was known as the jogori and was a shirt with narrow sleeves that was worn by both genders. And underneath it was worn the baji, or a traditional Korean baggy and loose trouser by the men, while the women would wear the chima, which is a skirt that was wrapped around and was floor length with a wide waistband over the chest. And then the jacket that would be worn was called the magoja, that was originally worn by men and later adapted by women. So yeah, here's Korean. So yeah, this is sort of more the traditional style that we sort of see, especially at like weddings or recreations or all that. But this over here, it looks really stupid, but this is actually probably more commonly worn, especially by the average person. And it's weird because, of course, Korea, it's not like it's is an Islamic country or anything. But yeah, for some reason they just didn't like. I think it was actually a foreigner thing where they didn't want to show their women to foreigners, so they made them cover up as much as possible. And so you get pseudo-Islamic vibes from Koreans here. So this is more upper class, this is more lower class. But yeah, we can see very huge, these are huge sleeves and also pretty wide dress as well. Another example is the Jeju people. Jeju is an island off the coast of South Korea. So this is more Korean looking clothing. All right, now we'll get to Chinese, Vietnamese. So the typical style that was worn in China and Vietnam was an upper garment with either a skirt or trousers worn underneath. Though unsurprisingly, men tended to wear the trousers and women would wear the shirt, although either could wear either one if they chose to. So it wasn't like strictly divided by gender. Um, Now, usually a vest was worn as well as a large robe, and the large robe would be worn on top of all the clothing that they would wear. And this would usually have some kind of embroidery, usually representing flowers or animals. And then shoes would be worn, especially in China. Um, and there was no standard headgear, with a wide variety of hats and head decoration being worn. Okay, so let's start with the Manchus. For those of us who are interested in history, you probably heard of the Manchus, a tiny group back then, but even nowadays. But they conquered all of China and created the Qing dynasty, which was the last imperial dynasty in Chinese history. And they had a wide variety of clothes, which is why they're the only group in this presentation which has 3 pictures here. Um, but yeah, here we can see like a wedding, and then typical man, and then typical woman. You'll notice here she is actually wearing some kind of high heel. So not this type we're used to seeing in the West, but that's why we can't see her feet at all, because she's wearing these interesting platform high-heeled shoes. And then the women are also wearing this kind of interesting hat, whereas the men, they would wear more of a fur hat. Now we can't really see in this picture, but one thing the Manchus were very known for was forcing everyone, well, forcing all the men to wear a queue, which basically meant they would shave all their head except one part, and then they would grow that one part really, really long, and so they'd usually form a ponytail out of that. So yeah, this was you know, typical Manchu clothing we saw back in the day. Of course, the most famous Han Chinese. Um, Found especially for the women, the Han Chinese had very nice clothing. And Han Chinese was the hardest to research. There were so many options, like choosing a picture like took forever. But in the end, I settled on these 2 pictures because I think they best represented kind of the typical Han Chinese clothing. And of course, right, Han Chinese is basically what we think of as Chinese, speak Mandarin, all that. But yeah, we can see, sort of wearing a robe here, robes here as well, and then very nice intricate pattern. And this guy is wearing specifically what's known as a shen yi, which is the oldest kind of robe and the oldest known traditional kind of clothing we find in China. All right, the Dungan people. So the Dungan are actually located somewhere, I think, in northwestern China, and they led a big revolt against the Qing-controlled Chinese Empire back in the 1800s. But yeah, very similar to Chinese Hunanese. So Hunan is an area in southern China, and again, very obvious Chinese influences, Han Chinese influences there. Perenakins. I always thought this was a very cool looking image. Almost looks like taking place in the moment, but it was probably posed for. But yeah, the Perenakins were basically the Chinese who lived in Southeast Asia and specifically Malaysia. Um, yeah, I think Malaysia and Indonesia mainly. So yeah, again, we see the floral motifs. Not wearing shoes probably because she's in a hotter climate, as opposed to, for example, here, right? Uh, they're wearing very interesting looking shoes here. Same here. But yeah, um, it's one of my favorite pictures, Perenakins. The Benteng, also located in southeastern China. Same with the Tiochao. So a lot of these people might identify as, Chinese in general because I guess Chinese identity is very interesting where there's like a core ethnic identity, but there's also a greater Chinese identity. But they're all very similar clothing and culture. Cantonese, so Cantonese, named after Canton, also now known as Guangzhou. And so these people are located, Guangzhou, Hong Kong, Macau area. So we can see theirs is a little simpler, but still similar, right, to other Chinese kind of clothing. And then finally we get to Vietnamese, and this one's also one of my favorite pictures. I think she has very, very nice background, very cool red dress and hat that she's wearing. And yeah, just red everywhere. Another thing, red is a symbol of like good luck in uh, East Asian culture, so that's why we see a lot of red. This is red. This is kind of red. This is red. This is red. This is red. They're not wearing red here. This is also red, yeah. Because red is yeah, very good color in Chinese and Vietnamese. Then we get to Southeastern Chinese. So by this, I don't mean like they're ethnically Chinese, but they're just in the southeast of China. So these are more like the Zhuang and the Miao people, and they have different clothing. It's actually pretty different from most of the traditional Chinese clothing, with the most unique features being the very original and decorated headdresses, which we will see very soon. And I would say there's probably no other group in the world that wears this much jewelry around their head, with these headdresses often being made of metal and reaching to over a foot high above the head, with some metal circles even dangling over the forehead. And then they would also wear very heavy and thick necklaces that would often support even more metal jewelry that would be attached below them with dangles that could reach all the way below the waist. So let's look at some of this. First, we have the Hainan people. The Hainan live on the island of Hainan, which is an island basically between China and Vietnam. And this is sort of the headdress I was talking about, right? Very elaborate, probably made out of silver or something. I'm not exactly sure. But yeah, we see this, the necklace, the headdress. Same with the Zhuang people. Again, once again, notice what they're wearing on their head. This is the main thing, although again, very thick necklaces that we see here. Achang, not as decorated, but still we see the same pattern. Fula is more simple. All right, here we have the Miao people, which is a very funny name, but yeah, Miao people have some of the most insane headdresses ever. And this must be pretty heavy, I have to say. And then you look at this. This is just the main necklace, which is covering these little necklaces, which is covering all of this, which then covers all of this, right? So we see this whole, or so much jewelry, so much metal they're wearing, and then they're also dancing while doing it. So props to them. It probably requires a good amount of balance as well. But yeah, Miao people mainly live in southeastern China. Um, Okay, so let's start off with a little bit of context, just in case you missed it last time. So essentially, This is a live stream that I am doing where I'm going to be showcasing the different kinds of traditional clothing in the world. And so this isn't the full presentation. The full presentation is around 1,750 slides, but obviously that's too much to present on YouTube. So instead, I've just showed the best examples from each different culture and style. And how this works basically is I start out by explaining, the general, um, the I guess the general features of that style of clothing, and then I let you guys see examples of it, and that's basically what we're doing. So last time we covered European, um, North African, West Asian, Central Asian, South Asian, and East Asian clothing. And so now we are moving on to Southeast Asia. Okay, so we're starting off here with Northeast Indian clothing, which is distinct because while it resembles Southeast Asian clothing, it has distinct features. Like most women, of course, Northeast Indian women would wear skirts, but what made them distinct is that it was not uncommon to see calf length or even ankle length skirts. These were known as sarongs, which is a large fabric worn around the waist that is usually ankle length and is often checkered. Among Northeast Indians specifically, red was a color that was nearly universally used and was often paired with black and white, with a white shirt being pretty common, and white or black stripes on the skirt. One thing that was unique only to this group was the distinctive headgear worn by women, which had upright feathers or sticks with soft and puffy material. Men often would go shirtless, or they would wear a shirt, but for the lower garment, they wouldn't cover their lower legs, instead opting for a loincloth or a knee-length skirt. Also, no footwear would be worn by either gender. So that was a lot, so let's look at some examples. Okay, so first we have the Garo people, right? So this is what I was talking about, right? Shorter skirt, the feathers in the hair over there. I find this to be one of my favorite pictures. I mean, it's obviously like a very, prepared, staged kind of photograph, but it looks pretty nice. So props to Pixel something for taking this picture. We have the Imol, right? So they're wearing, I don't even know what these are called, mini pom-poms, I guess, around their feet and then also on their head. Koireng, again, once again, notice in each of these cases the head, right? So they're wearing this little thing on their head, all these little pom-pom things. And again, the color red is something you will continue seeing throughout presentation, at least among Northeast Indians, and the striped pattern. Chakma, this is another one of my favorite pictures. Um, Very high quality, photographer. And again, once again, we have the stripes and these little things. Now, these look like feathers from what I can tell. I'm not exactly sure, but we see that all three of these ladies are all wearing feathers and a whole lot of necklaces too. You can see that here among the Garo as well. A lot of, yeah, very nice necklaces. Okay. Then we got the Purum. Again, same sort of deal, just the stripes, the necklaces. They aren't wearing anything unique on their head, but they're sort of an exception here. Tangkul. So yeah, this is sort of some kind of beaded thing, not exactly sure what it is. But you see the man wearing the loincloth, and woman has a lot of, I think these are some kind of rings. And again, red, red, red with the stripes. Keep seeing that pattern. Red with the stripes. Okay, we have the Kooky people, which is one of the funniest names I've heard. And so he's wearing shorts. But yeah, once again, this kind of headgear we continue seeing. Also, yeah, you might notice, right? I call these group Northeast Indians, but in terms of like racially, they're generally more East or Southeast Asian in terms of, yeah, the race. So that is the predominant, you know, I guess, race in northeastern India, as other than like somewhere like Assam. Okay, the Paite, now again, very great photographer. But yeah, once again, we see these little things here in the hair, uh, the use of the color red, and again, the stripes So we continue seeing all the stripes being worn here. Vai Fei, again, same thing with the little, you know, sticks and feather things on their head. Once again, we see the color red. Once again, we see the stripes. The zoo, same thing, right? Mizo people, so they are, I think, the majority in the state of Mizoram, so I think it's named after them. And it looks very similar. Well, I mean, there are similarities with the zoo, the Vaifei, but yeah, it looks very similar to the Paite people and the Koireng. And so we can see, right, all very similar cultures. Um, so again, the stripe pattern, once again, the little things in the head. Jingpo, this is always one of my favorite pictures here. And yeah, again, red, shorter skirt, pretty thick necklace, a lot of jewelry here. So this is probably the best example I could find here. So this is a full, probably like foot of just this little headgear thing with all the little thingies on their head. Okay, I'm not sure what they're called. And yeah, we can see very clearly the sarong. You can see it's sort of wrapped around, starts here and then wraps around over here. And again, main color, once again, red with a more white top. Baum people, same thing, same color, same kind of stripes. Darlong, so this is actually a thumbnail for one of my videos. So if somehow you remember any of my videos from like 6 years ago, that's who represents the Darlong people. We can see again the man's not wearing any shirt. He is wearing either some sort of loincloth or shorts. It's hard to see. And she's not wearing any headgear, but again, same thing, white shirt, red skirt, stripes. Hamar people, and this looks extremely similar to Mizo people. So yeah, again, the same things. I won't repeat it for every single slide, but we see all the same features. The Taoi, I don't know, I've always liked this picture. It just looks like they're gonna go to the beach or something. They're having a good time. But yeah, we can see here Vietnam, right? So we can see what country it is. And so this is more black, of course, but again, still a lot of red, the striped pattern. Katu people, a bit harder to see, but same sort of deal. Yeah, personally, even though this is a very small group, the total population would probably not be over like 20 million. The reason I had so many is just this is one of my favorite styles of clothing and a lot of good pictures, so that's why I included all these. Another thing we see right here is also that like none of them were wearing shoes, probably because of the climate. Okay, and so now we can move on to the more general Southeast Asian category. So Southeast Asian clothing was, of course, very similar to Northeast Indian clothing, with the only main difference really being that the sarongs would be ankle length all the time, nearly always striped, and would be worn by both genders. And so here we saw the men weren't really wearing the sarongs, whereas there the men do as well. However, some men would also wear trousers. One thing that was unique to Southeast Asian clothing was the wearing of a sash called the zbai, which went from one shoulder diagonally to the waist, and this was common amongst nearly all people in this style. And sometimes footwear would be worn, but that was not generally the case. So let's look at some examples. So Tai Lue. Keep in mind, there's a lot of groups called the Thai, but this isn't to be confused with the Thai people of Thailand. Although a lot of these Thai TAI people also live in Thailand. Um, so yeah, pretty similar as we can see, except they're wearing turbans essentially. Kamti, I mean, you can tell very much from this background that this is in Southeast Asia. And I remember for the longest time when I first saw this picture, I kind of was wondering, was like, does something weird looked or something look weird about her face? And then I realized it's probably like not painted, but something was put on her face to make it look lighter. Because it's definitely a different color from her hands or her feet here. Um, and so yeah, we can see the zbai being worn here, right? It's going from the shoulder to the waist and then sort of draping over. And yeah, once again, the sarong. Okay, then we got the Bamar people, and so these are the main people in Myanmar or Burma. So Burma was named after the Bamar people. So we see a whole family, and we can see the man is also wearing the sarong. The Rakhine people, so they live in the Rakhine state, I believe, of Myanmar, which is next to the Indian Ocean. And we can see again the man's wearing a sarong. The woman is too, hers is a bit tighter, and she's wearing this bai, but kind of the same thing. Here we have the Malay people, one of the most, I guess, important groups in the region, right? Because they're not just in Malaysia, but also a lot of them live in Indonesia. So we have two pictures. This shows women and children. Again, they are wearing the sarong, and whereas the men, they also are wearing some kind of skirt, but underneath it, they're wearing trousers. And they have this very unique, interesting kind of headgear that they wear. And we can see that they're all wearing this bai as well. This guy, and this guy. And then they use it to hold some daggers. Let's check back on the chat real quick. Okay, nothing's going on in the chat. Okay, Cham people, so they mainly live, I believe, in southern Vietnam. So pretty similar. Mandaris, they're in Indonesia. Mamasa, I always thought this picture looked pretty cool, and she has a very elaborate kind of headdress going on over here. Lampung, so they also live in Indonesia, I believe more western Indonesia. And we can see again sort of the stripe patterns that are very common in the use of a lot of necklaces. Okay, and so that's it for Southeast Asia. Now we're going to get the Thai Kadai people. So first of all, let's give a bit of a context about the Thai Kadai people. Thai Kadai basically are an ethno-linguistic group who mainly live in Thailand and Laos, but also some can be found in the neighboring areas of Vietnam, Cambodia, Myanmar. And so, yeah, we'll see some examples of that. So, yeah, Thai Kadai clothing was similar to other Southeast Asian clothing, but was more standardized, featuring a two-piece outfit consisting of a shirt that was usually white or light colored, paired with a sarong that was not too elaborately decorated. And this bai would sometimes be worn over the shirt, but it wasn't super common. Also, one thing you'll notice among these people is that the women would always wear their hair in a bun, and they do not wear shoes. Okay, so we'll just go back to chat to see if what's going on there. All right, so we start here with the Shan people. Um, so yeah, we see the very long sarong going down to the ankles here. Again, her face is sort of more painted white, and a pretty nice background too. I quite like this picture. Then we get to the actual Thai people, and so of course very similar sarong, and then you'll notice all the women have their hair tied in a bun. But then also you'll notice it looks quite different from what this man is wearing, and that's because this was the king of Thailand who sort of introduced Western clothing. I'm trying to remember what his name was. But this sort of became like an unofficial suit worn in the Thai royal court, after the introduction of Western customs. So that's why it sort of looks similar. You have sort of breech-looking things, the European style of shoes, the shirt, right? But this was what would have been more commonly worn every day. And again, quite a nice picture. And get the Phuan people, not exactly sure, but I believe they live in Thailand as well. See the same thing, this bai and the hair in a bun. And she also has a nice bag. And we see the same kind of textile pattern as well. Here on her dress as well. And yeah, I've always liked this picture. Thought it looked nice. Get the Lao people. These are the main people in Lao. And again, same kind of thing. Yeah, I don't know what it is, but whoever is taking photographs of the people all did a great job. These are all very good photographs. Then the Isan people, and they live mainly in, I think, just the state of Isan or something like that, and that's in northeastern Thailand. So we can see their hairstyle is a bit more elaborate, but it's still tied back with a lot of jewelry, and again, the long sarongs and then no shoes over there. Okay, now we get the Khmer people. So these are basically the main people in Cambodia. And so they would wear the sampot, or a long cloth worn around the lower body, or the sampot chongben, which was um, yeah, another wraparound cloth that was more like a trouser. So this bai originally was worn just to cover the breasts because women started off going topless, but then this increasingly became unacceptable, especially with the introduction of Buddhism. And then gold would also be worn specifically on the hats that they wore, which were very tall and often pointy. And then there would also be anklets that were worn instead of shoes around the feet. So we are going to look at an example, right? So this is very unique and different. So again, they have this very interesting kind of headdress, a lot of gold, you know, gold hats, gold colored stuff, a lot of necklaces, and we see the very thick, actually, gold anklets that are being worn here. And yeah, this is interesting because these sort of look like trousers, but also skirts. So yeah, Khmer clothing is some of the most unique and interesting in the world, I think. Then behind here, you can also see the man a little bit. But yeah, it almost looks like they have a temple on their head.